Today we are holding the 13th meeting within the framework of the series of workshops Contemporary Area Studies, the project of the School of International Regional Studies of the Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs of HEC University. Our discussion will be devoted to the US, China, and Russia triangle and how did the trade war between them become an information war. Of course, it's really one of the most, how to say, novel and interesting topic, not only for students, I mean, not only for academic researchers, but also for students, for ordinary people. So we'll talk about it with our key speaker today, Dr. Yonatan Freeman, professor of the Department of Political Science, Hebrew University. Dr. Freeman is a PhD in international relations at the Hebrew University in Jerusa-lem. He is a professor of the Department of Political Science of this university and lecturer at the David Ben-Gurion University in the Negev. He is the author of several studies in the field of international relations, as I remember, and comparative politics, and specializes in the study of foreign and military policies of Israel and the United States. Dr. Freeman, let me thank you to be with us and accepting our invitation. It's a great honor for us. And before we start, I want to say that with us today, as I said, also Dr. Vera Vishnyakova, the head of the School of International Regional Studies of the Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs of the HEC University. Now I give the floor her to some welcoming speech, and after that you can start, Dr. Freeman. Please, Dr. Vishnyakova.
Yes, thank you very much, Murat. Thank you very much for thank you all of you for joining us today. Yes, and before I get started, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to our main speaker who generously agreed to take part in this seminar to explain some details and in the modern situation of in the current situation of coronavirus. I think that our lecture will be interesting, and I offer to continue. Murat, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Freeman. Now you can start. Thank you one more time to accept our invitation. It's a great pleasure for us and a great honor. Please.
Thank you very much, and I also again thank the School of International Regional Studies for really providing this stage, because in the end this helps not just increase understanding of this subject, which I will discuss today, but also the links between our two countries, which is something that's very, very important historically and also in the past period. So just to really look into this issue, it's something in terms of the relations between the United States and China. We have been seeing it more and more play, both in academic circles, but also when it comes to policymakers. We've seen lots of news coverage about this subject, so I'm sure all those who are going to be viewing this lecture today and those in the future by way of the recording, I am certain that they'll be able to link the sort of things that they've been hearing about to what we're discussing right now. So I think if we look at the situation in terms of the relations between the United States and the People's Republic of China, we have to first look at the beginnings. And as we know, China is not the same China for thousands of years. It's always been changing in terms of its forms of government. And if we look at the relations between Beijing and Washington today, these are relations which really came to be officially in the 1970s. Because up until the 1970s, the United States recognized the Republic of China. In other words, Taiwan, which is what remains today. And only in the 1970s was there an official diplomatic relationship between the two countries. And we have two main events of the 1970s, which brought Washington and Beijing to start talking to one another again. The first one is what we call in our research and scholarship ping pong diplomacy, whereas we had sports tournaments, ping pong, where contestants and competitors from China and from the United States for the first time competed with ping pong rackets, and not just a few decades after they were fighting each other in Korea. So we had here a major event where for the first time both the Chinese individual and the American individual came to see the other not as Satan, but maybe as a saint, maybe someone we can talk to and not just shoot at. So these ping pong events occurring in Japan and other places really brought the two peoples together. And the next event, a major event, and I actually recommend anyone who wants to see an official documentary on this issue released by the Nixon Presidential Library about the Nixon visit to China, was the presidential visit to Beijing. And the US President Richard Nixon came to China, 1972, came to China, and in the end, this thing brought a new relationship between the two parties. He met Mao Zedong, he met Zhou Enlai, he met all the different players, and this was really a big announcement to the world. No longer will China be isolated by the world's superpower, and the United States will now allow China to reach the West, reach its markets, in the hopes that such a connection will lower the chance of war between these two nuclear powers. You have to remember that they have a nuclear weapon at that time, just like the United States does. So this major issue of meeting Mao Zedong really brought forward a new dawn in terms of relations between the United States and China. And actually, I recommend another book about this issue. Very fascinating book. It's about 700 pages long. I don't know if you have time, but you won't be able to put it down. The Private Life of Chairman Mao. It's the memoir of the personal doctor of Mao Zedong, and he talks about all these things that happen with regards to the relations with the United States. So these are two major events that I can classify as really the pinnacle of the new beginning between the People's Republic of China and the United States of America. Now, it hasn't been all rosy, okay? We're talking about, in a moment, we'll talk about the coronavirus, but there were different infections in the past as well, which caused tensions between the United States and China. And we have four major ones, which I can put forward and describe. The first one is really the events of Tiananmen towards the end of the Cold War, protests and different activities at the world's largest square, the People's Square in Beijing, actually even occurring while Gorbachev was visiting Beijing at the time. And the actions taken by the Chinese government and all the different media coverage of that event caused a big break and a big condemnation by the United States. And on the other hand, the Chinese were saying this is an internal affair and you are not to intervene or to criticize our actions. We can also recall that many of the protesters and those taking part at Tiananmen were trying to get the United States' attention. They built a little Statue of Liberty. They had a lot of messaging, tried to get the West to take notice. Although the West did not intervene, but it did cause a big problem in relations between the United States and China. The second event occurring during President Bill Clinton's administration in the United States was in 1996, where there were major drills taken by China in the vicinity of the Taiwanese island, which looked to many in the United States as a sort of flexing of the muscles, as if they're hinting that they're going to take a military measure against that island. And that caused the United States to increase its strength with Taiwan. I should also mention that once the United States recognized Beijing, they made a new deal with Taiwan, whereas if Taiwan were to be invaded, the US would come to its aid, and they would continue to provide what they needed to defend themselves. So Bill Clinton, while this event was happening, had to send ships, naval ships, destroyers, to sit between the Taiwanese island and the mainland to try to show his diplomacy of muscles, of diplomacy of ships, and try to deter the Chinese from continuing their military drills and military planning with regards to that island. The third event, which many people were viewing this broadcast and probably recall what they were doing in 1999 or know someone who was involved, was this war in Kosovo. And during the war in Kosovo, where NATO and others took aim against Slobodan Milosevic in what was termed Yugoslavia at the time, or Serbia, depends on how you call it, there was an incident where NATO planes bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, killing 3 Chinese diplomats and injuring others. This incident, a major incident, was explained by the United States and others as a mistake. They didn't have Google Maps at the time. They didn't know. There was no Waze. They didn't know where they were going, or old maps. And this incident, which also took aim at China, which disagreed with the war, just like Russia. They were on the side of Slobodan Milosevic. This caused a big break in relations between the two countries. Major protests by Chinese citizens at the United States Embassy in Beijing. They even, we're going to see a photo in a moment, even caused significant damage to the embassy building. This was a time you didn't really want to be an American in China looking around. And the final incident, which just occurred just a few years after the Belgrade bombing, and actually an incident, the first major incident of the George W. Bush administration in the United States, was the spy plane incident. I don't know if you guys remember that incident, where there was an American naval plane on a routine mission, which the Chinese said went into Chinese airspace, and the Chinese had to cause it to land at Hunan Island. And they were there as guests of the Chinese, as they put it, as guests, until they were released, until the United States released a statement saying, we're sorry for the fact that a Chinese pilot was killed during this incident. So the spy plane incident was a major incident. It should also be mentioned that when the deal was made with regards to the release of the United States soldiers from China, the Chinese agreed to pay the US money for the damage it did to the embassy during the protests during the 1999 event. So both sides paid. The US paid for room and board for their soldiers staying in China for 2 weeks, I think. And the Chinese paid money for damages made to their own, to the embassy in Beijing. And I think it came up to be about $300,000 the Chinese had to pay the Americans. So those are major crises of the past: the Tiananmen, Taiwan, Belgrade, and the spy plane. Now, when looking at the pre-coronavirus era, up until we heard about the coronavirus in December, there were a number of subjects that were on the plate between the United States and China. The first one was the issue of Kim Jong-un in North Korea. If you recall, there were major summits made by Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, if you recall, in Singapore and Vietnam. And these summits affected very much the relations with China. These were a way to also make China agree with the US that a nuclear weapon on the Korean Peninsula is something that is not in the Chinese interest. So the work that Trump was doing with Kim Jong-un was something, in a way, which brought China and the United States closer, because they were both looking at it the same way in terms of preventing a nuclear weapon from being in the hands of Pyongyang. And the issue of North Korea was also important for China because of their desire for that regime to survive in North Korea. They have no desire for Kim Jong-un to fall, and we'll talk about that in a bit. The second issue, which we recall, and was a major issue in the Donald Trump campaign, if you look at China, during his campaign in 2016, trade was the major issue. And the feeling was by Donald Trump and others supporting him that although there was free trade, there was not fair trade. And there were different practices done by China, which gave an edge to Chinese businesses, Chinese goods and services coming over the oceans. There was also the issue of intellectual property, which the US felt that the Chinese copyright safeguards weren't available to American companies coming into the country. So there were a number of deals being signed and negotiated between the Trump administration and Xi Jinping in Beijing with regards to trade. And up until the coronavirus issue, there were a lot of talks and a lot of accusations as to whether or not both sides are fulfilling their end of the deal in terms of whether or not the trade is improving and that each side has equal access to both countries' markets. Another issue which was important with regards to trade was the fact that Chinese were buying up many American businesses. And I don't know if you guys know, but a number of years ago, and this wasn't really covered much by the media, but now you know, the Chinese for the first time, notice what I'm saying, the first time opened a factory in the US. They opened a factory there, okay? And they've been buying up a lot of bankrupt American businesses and starting to take over some of the American industry. And this was a big challenge to the United States in terms of wanting to have certain industries remaining in American hands. The second subject, which was on the plate between China and the US, was the military modernization. And there used to be a big joke in the US military, and there's been studies quoting that joke, that in the past, if the Chinese wanted to invade Taiwan, they would have to swim. They'd have to swim 1 million Chinese soldiers over the sea. But now they have aircraft carriers. Now they have modern GPS systems, which they're developing. Just like, by the way, Russia has their own GPS system now too, competing with the US as well. And the military is becoming more and more modern in terms of its strategies, its tactics, its budget. And that's a big threat in terms of what they can pose to the United States and other allies in the region, whether or not be Japan. To modernize its military have been going on for decades, but in the last few years, this is something which the US has really tried to make sure it doesn't gain an upper hand on its allies. Another issue which was on the plate was Syria. And there were a lot of reports, both by analysts, that Syria might be the first place that Chinese soldiers and military have been fighting. Many people don't know, in the last few years, the Chinese have already built a base overseas in Djibouti, okay, in Africa. They built a base. And they're looking for ways to test their military. And there have been reports that they might be involved in aiding the Assad regime in Syria, just like the Russian military have been doing that. But the Chinese have also been involved with Syria. It's also a major military buyer of Chinese equipment. So that's another place which has caused some friction between Washington and Beijing. Another subject has been Hong Kong, and you guys probably recall, up until the coronavirus, major protests for months in the Hong Kong Special Administrative region of China. And there have been even statements made by the US and Britain and others telling the Chinese, don't intervene with strong arm, don't use your military because we might do something in response. So Hong Kong was really very much a big issue that was growing and causing some disagreement between the US and China. Another subject has been the cyber attacks, which have also been occurring during the past elections in the US, and there have been statements about that. The effects of the cyber attacks have also caused the US to try to sanction companies who are involved. There's also been some analysts who are finding that maybe the Chinese are allowing North Koreans to use their internet there in China to attack the United States. And if you guys recall, there was a movie made a few years ago in the US making fun at Kim Jong-il. Remember that in North Korea, The Interview? I don't know if you remember that movie. And North Korea was threatening, don't show that film or it will be the last film you show in your cinemas. And there were a few attacks against American movie makers, cyber attacks, stealing the movie, locking out the systems, and some people feel these were attacks made by North Korean on Chinese soil. The next subject was the South China Sea, and this is for years, and we've seen a lot of reports about that. The Chinese have been building artificial islands in the South China Sea, islands not to open a nice resort, but to open up a nice air base and a nice military base. And according to the US, artificial islands, according to the US, are in an ocean, and we can even go and take a ship there. And there've already been incidents of US ships sailing the seas, coming very near to those islands, and some confrontation occurring between the Chinese and the US, as well as between the Chinese and American allies in the region, like the Philippines. And actually, a number of years ago, the Chinese government came out with a new passport for their citizens, and there was a map in the passport, a little map showing what China is. And let's say the borders there were very different borders than what the US thought China was in terms of different islands and different areas in the sea. And the final subject before the coronavirus was the Iran deal, okay? And the Chinese were very much on the other side of the moves made by the US, Israel, and others in terms of the Iran deal, in terms of the sanctions against Iran. There are a lot of links between the two countries, and that's something which the US has felt is not helpful for the relations between Beijing and Washington. And this is something which has also caused some friction at the UN, where both sides have obviously the veto power in the UN Security Council. So this is really the map, the blueprint, that what was before. What was on the plate between those in Beijing and those in Washington. Now, if you look at what's happening now, and we have to say again, the coronavirus is still going on and is still developing, so we can't be for sure what will happen, but these are things that I can already see as developing. And there are another number of groups, number of categories where we can see what has occurred and what might occur now in this coronavirus era between Beijing and Washington. The first thing is our incidents against governmental and business institutions. In this picture, which you see right here, that's the front of the former US Embassy in Beijing after NATO planes accidentally bombed the Beijing Embassy in Belgrade. That's what the Beijing Embassy looked like. Now, this shows that there is potential. There is potential for incidents against Chinese institutions, Chinese businesses, Chinese government diplomats and others around the world, as well as against American American businesses, and diplomatic institutions around the world. Because of what's happening, and we're going to go into a lot of subjects, we could see incidents against those establishments in both countries. Both the US has many places relating to China, and China has as well, both businesses and diplomatic areas. The second category is student exchanges. And many people know, and you probably have it in Russia as well, that there have been an increase in Chinese students who study abroad, an increase in American students who study in the US, not just in terms of universities, but even high schools. I don't know if you guys recall, during the coronavirus beginning, many American students who recently came back from being overseas at Chinese high schools had to be in quarantine in the US. So this period where the virus is now influencing travel in terms of these educational and cultural exchanges might lead to a drastic lowering, not just because of fear of the virus, but fear of violence or mistrust between the two sides. So we might see major changes in terms of the population exchanges, in terms of education and culture between the two countries. The next category, I don't know if anyone recognizes this movie, Red Dawn, came out in 2012. It's a reboot of a different movie. Red Dawn talks about, the original movie was made in the 1980s, and it's fictional, obviously. And the movie was that the Soviet Union invaded the US from Mexico and using airplanes landing in airports in the United States, and Russia invaded. So in 2012, they made a new movie. And you know who they chose to be the country invading? China. And after lots of protests by the Chinese saying, you do this, we're not watching any movies of yours. And that's 1 billion reasons why we should change. They changed the film that North Koreans, they were the ones who invaded the US. By the way, they had to do some CGI stuff to make it look, oh, he's a Korean, he's not a Chinese. But that's an incident where they didn't do it. But what can happen now, we might see more and more movies, both in the Chinese film industry and the American film industry, where the Chinese is the villain and the American is a villain. That's something we haven't seen in a while between those two countries in terms of official government stuff. So Red Dawn might have a new reboot. Maybe they'll go back to China. It'll be easy. They have the recording from the last one they canceled. And we also have tourism. Okay, tourism, as China has been increasing its economic might, more Chinese people have been traveling abroad. That's a major industry in terms of Chinese individuals coming to the US and also Americans coming to China. And that could drastically impact the tourism industry. We also have to recall that there are major casinos in China, in Macau, for example, major casinos where Americans have also frequented. So tourism can take a big hit, both because of mistrust and because of increased violence or instability when it comes to citizens of those two countries traveling in both communities. A next major tension, which we are already seeing right now, is a new information war between the Chinese and the Americans with regards to the virus. But again, as I discussed before, until we got to this part of the presentation, the virus issue is part of a bigger picture, okay? It's only really waking up dormant things and dormant views that both sides have. And the information war centers on three major subjects. The first one is, where did the virus come from? Okay, the official account is a seafood or live wet market in Wuhan, China. On the other hand, there have been floated both by the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in the US even Donald Trump and others, and even around the world, those who are now agreeing with the US that an investigation has to be made, that the virus may have not been from that market. Rather, it was from a research center near Wuhan, okay, that dealt with researching viruses. Now, most of the talk is not that China released it, but there was an accident. There was an accident, and maybe the reason China hid it was not because they wanted the world to go crazy, but because they didn't want their own people to go crazy and find the government incompetent, because this shows that they weren't responsible. So the origin of the virus is the first, let's say, a new ping pong narrative between the two countries. The next one is the timeline. When did China know? Not just what did it know, but when did they know it? When was the outbreak? There have been reports that people with the virus in the US had it, and they didn't know that they had it, and now we know they had it, and it was before the Chinese made an official announcement that there was an outbreak of the virus. So what is the timeline? And there's already being hinted by the Chinese that maybe the virus is not from China. China is saying maybe it came from the US. Maybe you brought it here. And the third subject, and we heard it in Trump's press conference a couple weeks ago, is that the death rate of those dying from the virus in China, according to the US, seems to be too low if you look at other countries who have been infected. If you look at South Korea, if you look at Sweden, you look at all these different countries, even the US. There is a claim now that maybe more have died and not enough has been told to the public as to what the results were of the virus and how many are even dying now. And I don't know if you guys saw a few days ago, there might be a new outbreak now in China, a new outbreak in China. So these are the three major narratives which are being debated by the US and China, and each side now is accusing the other of hiding or of using this incident for political points. And this has had a major impact already on public opinion in the US. And look at this diagram by Pew Research Center, how the negative view of China continues to grow in the US. A negative view of China continues to grow. And part of the reason why it's growing is because of incidents like this, the trade war, different accusations, and this has had a major influence on the elected officials of the US. Donald Trump didn't just choose, I know we'd like to think of Trump just shoot out of the blue, oh, we'll just talk about China. Donald Trump didn't talk about China because it's Donald Trump. He talked about China because Americans were talking about China. This was something of concern even before Donald Trump was saying it. He was just saying it louder than Hillary Clinton. That's the whole thing. So this has had a major impact on elected officials, and you're going to see now in 2020, you know, we have elections in the US in a few months. You know, it's not just the president being elected, there's a Congress, you know, there's a lot of different elections now, not just the president. China will be a major talking point, and we're going to see more and more candidates running on an agenda which is more and more anti-China. And just a few days ago, I don't know if you saw, in the US Senate, they're trying to pass new laws and new measures which make it harder for China to do business in the US, which stifle funding to different organizations that the Chinese are leading, which is causing different people to stop links with China and different businesses, different airlines. So public opinion is having a major effect on the Chinese narrative. And I must also say that even China has public opinion, even they have it. And if we reach a point where this information war is getting more and more drastic, and we're looking at that right now, you can't rule out the fact that the Chinese government and the country might seek to cause the masses and cause the people to project that critical opinion of the US more. Okay, and I can give you an example, if you recall, on a parallel level, when Erdogan, remember in Turkey, he, by mistake, shot down in a Russian plane, remember that? Remember he shot down a plane over Turkey by mistake. I don't know if you remember that, a few years ago. And President Putin, he encouraged Russians, don't go vacation in Turkey anymore. Don't go there anymore. Don't go there. Go to Sochi. Who wants to go to Ankara? Go to Sochi. It's better stuff. And they didn't go. And Erdogan had to drink a lot of water that day because he was swimming. So we can see that kind of talk, and we're already seeing some of it by Chinese officials with regards to United States, and we might see actions like I discussed before by Chinese people with regards to Americans. Another area of change which we might see in this coronavirus era are really shifts in alliances and shifts in spheres of influence. This is very important. And the first triangle, which we might potentially see an impact because of this coronavirus, is the Russia, China, American triangle. And by the way, I chose this picture. We see it here with the Vietnamese leader. It's very difficult to find. I looked on Google everywhere to find a picture where Trump, Xi Jinping, and Putin are together in a picture. It's almost no pictures. This is like the only one I found. And it tells you a lot. It tells you a lot. And what we could see with this coronavirus era, on the first instance, is the formation of two camps, which might affect who has been historically with China and who has been historically with Russia and with the US, shifting alliances. And what do I mean by that? As I mentioned before, the Americans are now on a worldwide campaign to get more and more countries to support the American desire and demand that there will be an investigation of the virus, and the demand that China allows to investigate. And if you saw, we already have the Canadians saying, okay, we'll do it, the French, Britain, but some countries have not said it yet, by the way. India, for example, have not said it yet. We haven't seen Korea say anything about it, even Israel. Many, many countries have not chosen yet which side of the coin they're with, Americans or the Chinese. The Russians, until now, have not officially said they want an investigation of what happened with the virus. You might recall, with the outbreak of the virus in China, Russia was one of the first countries in the world to put different, to pass different measures against Chinese people in Russia. Remember that? They started, before the world did it even, because there's many Chinese people in Russia, long border. And this caused some friction with the Chinese, if you recall. And the Chinese released a statement saying, we understand the Russian measures with regards to our citizens here in Russia. But we are seeing more and more measures, and because of the spread in Russia, we might see a break between Russia and China because of this virus, and we might see as a result a closer relationship between Russia and America. This virus might infect more love between Trump and Putin. I know they always say they love each other. He says he's smart. Okay. But we might see more and more good relations between Russia and America because of what's happening with the virus. On the other hand, there are some incidents which might cause Russia and China to strengthen their relations again. For example, things relating to Iran or North Korea, which I'll talk about in a moment. But there is potential for more and more countries which have historically been pro-China to now switch and be pro-America because of this issue of the virus. For example, India, for example, for decades, were always pro-Moscow. If you recall, during the Cold War, India was for Moscow. Pakistan was for America. And only in recent times has India come closer to the West. But we might see a change because even India has problems with China, not just with the virus, but even with their border. Just last week, I think there was an incident on the border on the Himalayas between the Chinese and the Indians. So that's one issue. The shift in the triangle, we might see new camps formed because of that virus. The other area is because of weakening of American influence in certain areas of the world, both because of economic trouble, also caused by the virus, is the expansion of influence by the Chinese Republic and the Russian Federation in areas which now are maybe facing a vacuum in power. And one of those is Africa. And as you probably know, I don't know if you've been to Africa, someone here recently, you can see massive influx of Chinese investment, Chinese links to the African continent. Okay, go to Kenya. You go to Kenya, you see Japanese cars and Chinese roads. Interesting relationship there. Chinese roads, Japanese cars. And increased links by China in Africa, also Russia. We've been having recent visits by Russian leaders and Chinese leaders to the continent. And many of the countries need tools there in Africa. And who's providing the tools and offering to provide help? Beijing and Moscow, and not Washington, not Washington. So we might see more and more need of that. And I don't know if you've seen the news recently, the virus is getting out of hand in some countries in Africa, and they're turning to China and Russia, come help us, fight the virus. And what might happen is that even after the virus is no longer there, some Russian influence and some Chinese influence will remain there and feel at home. They won't go to duty free. They'll have a duty to stay there. And we also have a potential of new flashpoints or renewed flashpoints. And as you see here, we have two flags. We have the flag of Taiwan and the flag of Hong Kong. And Taiwan, I don't know if you've seen, has pretty much had a good rap on the virus. The virus is pretty much under control right now in Taiwan, unlike maybe other countries. And in recent times, there's been a public opinion in Taiwan, which is maybe driving Taiwan to more and more seek independence, or to no longer want to reunite with China, as China believes it should. So we might see an increase of flexing of muscles by the Chinese against Taiwan, and this might even cause a need for US intervention to try to deter Chinese moves. And I have to also mention again, US law currently is that if Taiwan is invaded by China, the US is supposed to come defend Taiwan. Until this day, it's still on the books. So this is a major flashpoint which might occur in terms of new flexing of muscles between the Chinese with regards to Taiwan. Also Hong Kong, okay? We talked about the protests, and the Chinese might use the virus as a pretext to increase its security hold on Hong Kong. And we'll have to see what happens, because right now there are pretty much laws and different measures in Hong Kong which prevent public protests because of the virus. But we might see a new flashpoint in Hong Kong, which again might have to cause U.S. intervention in terms of trying to be critical of what's happening with Chinese moves there in Hong Kong. And the final category is Chinese mediation. This is very interesting. And there's been a saying, and by the way, I tried to look up who said it. Everyone thinks it's Spider-Man, but it's not Spider-Man. With power comes more responsibility. You probably heard that from the Spider-Man movie. But it's not from Spider-Man, it's from somewhere else, but no one knows where it's from. As China has been growing more powerful, it's taken on more and more roles. They're not just making stuff in China, they're buying stuff in China, and they're building military bases outside of China. And you have to not rule out the fact that in the future, the Chinese might feel that because of waning American power diplomatically, it might be time to be the mediator maybe the mediator. I always say in my classes here at Hebrew U in Jerusalem, I tell everyone, don't be surprised as an Israeli if one day the mediator isn't Jason Greenblatt, it's Jason Chen. He's the mediator. And the Chinese could very much be the new mediator, for example, between the Israelis and Palestinians. It might not be the Trump plan, it might be the Xi Jinping plan, okay? And the Chinese could be an interesting mediator. You know, some might say they're more close to the Palestinians. I don't know, maybe they're more neutral. They're more closer to what's in their interest. What's in their interest. So these are spheres of influence and shifting alliances which might occur between the two countries. We also have a military threat during this coronavirus, and many people haven't realized that the Chinese fight against the Wuhan virus and their use of the military was the first time policymakers in the United States saw the Chinese military in action. They've never seen it in action on a modern level ever since 1989. This mobilization of the Chinese military to fight the virus, and when I talk about mobilization, I'm talking about they saw for the first time these major Chinese Air Force planes landing soldiers, huge hospital tents in a matter of days, military hospital tents, military forces being called up. They look modern. They look like American soldiers. What's the difference? They look modern. This was the first time that American policymakers and those in charge of the American military saw the Chinese modern military in action inside China. And I'm telling you, it didn't just scare them about the virus, it might have scared them about what they saw in terms of the military. This isn't the military they thought there was there in China. So the fact that the Chinese People's Liberation Army liberated the country from the virus was a major threat and a major first case ever for the US to see the Chinese military in action. I'm telling you, they took notes. They took notes as to what they saw. Because think about it. If there ever is a military confrontation between America and China, part of the confrontation will be to mobilize the army in your own country to defend the country, you know, to see what you're doing. And they saw it for the first time. The second category is space. And I don't know if you know, this month, in a few days, for the first time since 2011, the US will finally, hopefully, launch humans into space. Ever since 2011, Russia and China were the only countries in the world to be able to launch humans to space, not even America. And if you recall, from time to time we hear about Americans going to space. Well, they bought a ticket from Putin. They bought a ticket, very expensive ticket, to be launched from Kazakhstan or from somewhere else to space. So the move we're going to send is not just a move to show America is in business, but a move to tell the Chinese people, we're going back to space and we know what you're doing, because the Chinese right now are building space stations. They have plans to build a base on the moon. And this is a major threat. So in a few days, we might even see a confrontation or some kind of response by the Chinese when they launch it. Who knows? It could be something they say, I don't know, whatever it's going to be. I think it's May 27th. That's when the launch is. This will be a major flexing of muscles militarily by the US to China, to tell them, listen, we know you've been there for years. We're coming back to space, and we're going to show you that we're able to do that as well. And the third issue, which relates very much to the threat, is North Korea. You know, a lot of people don't know, I always teach in my classes, that there are 3 countries that North Korea borders. Everyone says, what? There's only 2 countries. No. There's 3 countries. North Korea borders China, South Korea, and Russia. Many people don't know. There's a little 10-kilometer border between North Korea and Russia and the Russian Federation. By the way, I tried to look on YouTube the other day, see if anyone went there from Russia to the border, and you're not allowed to go there. They're not allowed to go there. If you try to go from Russia to North Korea, you're gonna get something else. You'll get something else. But so the Russians border North Korea. Many people don't know that. And actually, Russia also had links to North Korea ever since its foundation, after the World War II with Kim Il-sung and others. So, and they always have the train ready. Whenever Kim Jong-un wants to take a train, he can always go to Moscow with the train. It's the only train, I think, that can go from North Korea to Russia or something. So, North Korea, as you might have seen in the news, has 0 coronavirus cases. There's no coronavirus. I heard about an incident a few months ago. There was one. He ran away, they killed him. Other than that, there is no coronavirus. The coronavirus is scared of coming to North Korea for some reason. I don't know. Somehow he's not there. On the other hand, what happened recently with Kim Il-sung or Kim Jong-un, that no one knew where he was. Remember Kim Jong-un, where is he? And Donald Trump, they asked him, where is he? He said, I hope he's fine. I love him. I hope he's fine. And some people thought that maybe it's because of the virus that's now out of hand in North Korea, which is causing major problems to North Korean regime. It could cause major problems. And as I mentioned before, China has a major reason to desire Kim Jong-un to remain the leader in Pyongyang. Major reason. I would also add Russian Federation also has a major reason why Kim Jong-un remains in place in North Korea. And they have 2 major reasons for China. The first reason is, if Kim Jong-un were to fall because of the virus, because it does too many scary things with its nuclear capabilities and Trump wants to invade of someone, if North Korea seems to be on the way to ending the Kim Jong-un regime, both because of what's happening inside North Korea, because of North Korean action, which is provoking the world, I do not rule out the Chinese from invading North Korea. Now, there's 2 major reasons why. The first reason why is that if Kim Jong-un falls, and there's about 20 million North Koreans in North Korea, 20 million. There's 40 million South Koreans. Okay, it's 20 million in North Korea. If Kim Jong-un falls, guess where the millions of North Koreans will be running to? They won't be running to the minefield to South Korea. They won't be running there. They'll be running to China and maybe even to Russia a bit. But millions of Chinese people will be facing millions of North Korean refugees coming into China. And they don't want that. The second reason why China wants Kim Jong-un in power is that if Kim Jong-un falls and there is no North Korea, we can assume in the long term that North Korea would reunite with South Korea. And if North Korea reunites with South Korea, what will you have is a major power, a major pro-American power on the Chinese border. Think about it. The moment North Korea reunites with South Korea under the South Korean flag, we have a major pro-American power with American soldiers, there's like 20,000 there, on the Chinese border. So a major threat could be to cause both sides to come one at the other is if we have a major shift in who is ruling North Korea. And this virus, we don't know for sure right now what's going on, but if the virus weakens too much, Kim Jong-un, I would argue that the major threat that Kim Jong-un has is not Donald Trump. It's Xi Jinping. And if anyone here wants to realize and say, oh, China would never invade a communist country. They would never do it. Okay, they would never do it. I give you the example history of communist countries fighting each other. Even China had a war with the Soviet Union on the border. We had Vietnam invade communist Cambodia when the Khmer Rouge was there. So in the end, China wants to safeguard its interests, And I would argue that the major threat that has on North Korea is not Donald Trump, it's Xi Jinping. Another area of tension between the US and China in this coronavirus era is the issue of protectionism. And what we can see now, because of the virus and because of future thinking about future viruses, think about this. Let's say the coronavirus is over. This has changed the way we think about viruses. And what the US realized, for example, many types of equipment it needed to fight the virus was made in China. So what we might see now is that certain equipment that is needed by the military, by civilian forces, to deal with medical emergencies, both sides, especially the US, will start to protect those industries from going to Beijing so that the masks and the different things they need for their hospitals are somewhat made in the US and not in China. And we're going to see trade wars about that, where they want to safeguard their equipment. Another thing is the Belt and Road Initiative. You probably heard about that in the last few years with China, trying to connect the world with maritime links and railroad links. And the fact that this virus has really provided for increased wishes by many countries to safeguard their borders, this might challenge the Chinese plans for their Belt and Road, and this might help those in the US which are seeking to protect and challenge what the Chinese are trying to do in the last few years with regards to the Belt and Road Initiative. We also, because of the protectionism, might see disagreements and legal proceedings in bodies such as the World Trade Organization. Okay, the World Trade Organization is a body which the Chinese are in there, the Americans are in there, which has a goal of safeguarding free trade. And if we're going to have cases where people are saying he's not allowing free trade because he's protecting equipment that is producing medical emergencies, we might see different deliberations in those organizations. So equipment that has to do with these epidemics and pandemics, we might see more debates about that in things like the WTO. And finally, a few recent times, we had for the first time the unveiling of a new passenger jet made in China. As we know, we have Boeing and Airbus, and the Chinese now have their own. And because of what's happening with the industries and the impact on trade in terms of the virus, we might see an increase and expansion of Chinese jets being made, and a major challenge to the monopoly that Boeing and Airbus has around the world. So we might see more and more airlines taking and buying those jets, especially because they have been losing a lot of money because of the coronavirus. They're looking to save money. And the Chinese jet is cheaper, and they can produce it even quicker than Airbus and Boeing. So we're going to see, I can tell you already, I don't know them, I don't talk to them, but their phone line is busy right now. Everyone's ordering from Alibaba and AliExpress the Chinese-made jets. And we might also see new formation of intergovernmental organizations. A few years ago, the Chinese started their own international development bank. It's called the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. They started it. It's in Beijing. And they lead it. By the way, many countries joined, even Israel. America didn't join. But because of this new formation of camps by Washington and Beijing, and the fact that each side is not persuaded by the other side's narrative with regards to this virus and trade, we might see more and more organizations and more camps that are being formed by way of IGO. So we might see new ones like banks, maybe even a new health organization. Okay, the World Health Organization is under a major attack right now by many countries with regards to what they knew about the virus. And by the way, I mentioned India. Later this month, India is supposed to be one of the major leaders of the WHO. And that might be one of the reasons why they're not taking up a narrative right now with regards to China or the US. Right now, India is thinking about it, so that could also be the reason. So the final issue really that we have to mention is what should other countries do? And I know people here from Russia and maybe around the world will be watching this. What should we do? Let's say we're not Americans and we're not Chinese. Let's say we're Russians and let's say we're Israelis. What do we do? So there's a new war brewing between Beijing and Washington. What does it matter to us? It should matter a lot to you. And here's are the 4 things you can do and you should think about. The first thing is stockpiles. Stockpiles. Many, many countries during this emergency realized we have no stockpile. People thought about, oh, if there's an emergency, I'll order it. I'll order it online. Someone will be able to tell me. No one thought about an emergency which affects the whole world at the same time. You know, everyone thinks, oh, just me, then I'll be able to talk to someone else. This coronavirus proved something very rare, an emergency in modern times which affected everyone at the same time. That's very, very different than what we had in the past. You know, people thought, oh, emergency, just me. I'll order something from my ally. This time, even my allies had it. So I urge, based on what we know right now, for all countries and all communities and even people, you should have stockpiles necessary for times where not just there's an emergency, but the emergency is happening at the same time everywhere, where no one can give you anything because they themselves have it. They have the virus. So I can tell you that we already have talks in the United States of bolstering the national strategic stockpile. I can also tell you that we can even project that every one of the 50 states in the US will look into having their own stockpile. Russia is a federation, and you also have countries and provinces, different things inside Russia. We might expect, or we might urge different areas of Russia to also have their own local stockpiles, okay, for such an issue. The second issue, which we also found because of this coronavirus, and which really could tell public what to do, is the fact not enough countries drilled for types of emergencies happening nationally. I can tell you that for sure most countries had military drills, no problem. But when was the last time countries had a citizen drill? What do citizens do? So I think one thing countries should do, and they're already thinking about it, how to drill, how to practice a situation where the public is also involved. It's not just a missile, it could also be a medical emergency. What do we do? Who do we call? What should we have in our house? To have drills, I can tell you Israel, for example, I would argue one of the reasons why we are leading the world, for sure the West, and having a lid on the virus is because our population is always in a drill, always in a drill. So we know how to prepare and how to deal with emergency situations, not just in uniform, just even with a suit. So I think this is something which countries should also prepare in terms of not just the military with regards to viruses, but also the public. Another area is foreign investment. As I mentioned, the Chinese in recent times have been buying up different places in the US, investing a lot of currency in trying to expand in the US and other places around the world. But what we have found, and we've already seen this in research, many of the industries which once were producing things in the country that they needed for this emergency was no longer there. It went overseas. So I think what countries should also do is make sure they have enough oversight as to not just who's investing, but what are they investing in? Is that an industry which in times of need, I will need? I will need. And the final area of how we should prepare is really looking at demographics. This is very interesting. I think this is going to be the first time you've heard about it. Many countries, including Russia, look, even Russia's on the list, have very large populations of its citizens overseas. Russia, 10 million Russians live overseas. I don't know if you knew that. India, 15 million Indians live overseas. By the way, Israel, you could classify Israel not just having Israelis overseas, but also Jewish people, as we represent the Jewish state. So we have millions as well. So what could happen because of this coronavirus period, both of drastic impacts on economies, drastic situations in countries with regards to different quarantines, measures, we could see, this is very interesting, many, for example, Russians saying, I want to go home. Send me Aeroflot. Telling Israel, I want to go home. Send me El Al. And I can tell you here in Israel, we already have reports of Israelis and Jewish people which are now becoming more and more interested to come back here because of what's going on. So an increase in tension because of the virus, and also with regards to the relations between China and America, which could lead to many things, we might see an increase in immigration and a return of your citizens back to their country, or a desire. I don't know, maybe someone in the Q&A could tell me, has there been Russians coming home recently because of the virus? I think so. I think I saw some reports about that. People coming in different planes. So this is a major thing, and why we should prepare, because if there's millions coming back, where are they going to live? Where are they going to work? What are we going to do if they have a virus? We have to do a quarantine. What are we going to do? So we should prepare for that fact that maybe countries with major diasporas, we might see, because of the situation and possible tension between these two major powers, a desire of your citizens who for years have said, no, I love it in New York. I love it in Berlin. I love it. Calling you up, I love you. Come get me now. Okay, come get me now. I'd like to thank you. I'm open to any questions. If you want to read more about my background, you can go to my website or email me. I'd like to thank again, and I'll open to any questions or comments about the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Freeman. It was really interesting, overwhelming, and sometimes maybe funny for me. I just want to, ask, as we supposed, your lecture should be about triangle: Russia, the United States of America, and China. But during your speech, maybe if I'm not mistaken, I outlined that we are shifting to a new world order when we will see two camps. It will be one leading by China, the another one leading by the United States. And Russia, it's like, one of ordinary international actor who try to choose one side. So could you please clarify your position on Russian role in this, new world order? Russia will be a new, maybe not new, like a world power, superpower, or it just ordinary international actor in political relations?
Thank you very much. I think if we look at this situation in the formation of two camps, I think for years we've had a desire by the Americans to continue to maintain a camp. At the end of the Cold War, there was only the American camp. There is no Soviet camp. There was no longer this bipolar international order. So after the Cold War, there was a very much big desire by the U.S. to try to maintain its camp in saying, we're the leader of the free world, And this issue of the coronavirus and what's brewing now, not so much just with the virus, but who do you believe, if this really continues and strengthens, who do you believe the American narrative or the Chinese narrative, I think this could provide the first good opportunity for the first time for China to announce or to try to create its own camp for the first time. Because before this incident, you know, they were buying up places, sending their businessmen, but it wasn't really forming a camp. You know, there wasn't a Chinese-led camp. This could really provide an opportunity for China. And we're seeing more and more a war of words coming by from China, which might be a preparation for that. And as I mentioned in this presentation, formation of new IGOs because of this. Who knows? Maybe if the WHO starts believing the American narrative, the China will say, Trump, you don't want to pay them? I don't want to even come to the meeting. They'll create their own health organization based in China. You never know. So this provides a very good opportunity. Now, historically, Russia has been close to China, has been very close. I mentioned the Kosovo War. I mentioned even the Cold War. If this continues, barring any major incident, for example, intervention or something with Taiwan or Hong Kong or North Korea, I think, as it seems now, and I hope for the best for Russia, we hope for the best for all countries, the issue of the virus could cause increased tension between the two countries. And as I mentioned, there was problems in the past between the two countries, even a war, even the border war. And so the Russians, I don't know if they would say, oh, with the American camp, but I think they would be more inclined to not be in the Chinese camp with regards to what's going on with the virus. And public opinion in Russia could be a very major role in causing the Russian government to decide that matter. Now, in terms of whether or not we can see China or Russia looking at itself as a world power, I think that regardless of this issue, I think the Russian government will continue to build itself as a world power. I think we've seen its actions both in Syria, in Ukraine. We've seen them also with regards to the recent or the very recent Winter Olympics. We even saw the Russian power recently. If you recall, in Israel, we had a major conference on anti-Semitism in Jerusalem, and Russia was the one who organized it, or they were a major guest. So I think even before the virus, Russia is looking to take in the world stage, and as America becomes more weaker or decides to go back, we might see Russia continuing on its move to try to project its power. And I don't rule out even becoming, just like I mentioned on China, a option for being a mediator in some sort of a conflict around the world.
Okay, thank you so much. Now I apply to our participants. I want to say that I allow you to turn on your microphones if you want. If you have any question, please write on chat, or you can raise your hand, use raise your hand function, and I will provide for you opportunity to ask a question to our speaker. Now I think maybe Professor Vishnyakova want to ask something or comment maybe.
Yes.
Please, Dr. Vishnyakova.
Dr. Freeman, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very important and interesting for us to know a new point of view of this problem from Israel. Yes, and I have some questions, comments. I'm a specialist in Korea, in Korean Peninsula. That's why I have some questions or comments with North Korea. I visited twice this country, and I know a lot of our Russian specialists who work at the embassy and who have some cooperation with some universities from North Korea. And as for North Korea, I can say that they really didn't. They killed nobody because of coronavirus. Yes, they really had one cases. And now there is no cases of coronaviruses in North Korea, and they have a mask regime. Kim Jong-un, the president, or Kim Jong-un, feels himself very well, and he works hard now. And they don't. I think that if the Kim Jong-un regime falls, the Korean citizens, the North Korean people will not run anywhere, because they have some they don't have a lot of information about other countries, and they live in a special world which was made by their government. And as for reunion, I agree with you that if South Korea and North Korea reunion, it will be a new power country, which will be nearby the border of China. And maybe this country is not, maybe China doesn't want to have some new power which will be led by the USA. And we really don't know, we don't know when it will be and how it will be. Yes, it's very difficult for us to predict something. Yeah, and as for question, I have a question, and I see the chat that our colleagues give the same, maybe give the same or similar question about the Israel and China cooperation. Could you say about the commodity turnover between China and Israel now?
What would I say about what? The links?
Commodity turnover. Okay.
Well, thank you very much for the comments. With regards to North Korea, yeah, I remember the incident about the one person, and I also agree that the official view of many who are close to DPRK is that there is no active coronavirus, and again, it's a very protective country. You know, you don't. Where are you going? Vacation? Where? Pyongyang. I don't think that's part of the conversation. We don't go there. But there are many Chinese people who do visit and are tourists there. So that's why some people feel that maybe we don't know what's going on. But again, I understand and respect that viewpoint. With regards to information there, I agree. Information is very much not maybe so much known with regards to the outside world. There is no internet, there's only intranet, and I think there's like 14 websites, and I think they're all the same. But again, there is a situation there which I agree could maybe pose a lack of fleeing to China and maybe just remaining there. But again, you have to see what's happening. By the way, I should mention that Israel and DPRK, we don't have official relations with one another. And we have different issues which cause some disagreement between the two countries. Maybe you can invite me again. I can talk about the history of relations between North Korea and Israel. I know a lot about that. I also deal with that issue as well. With regards to Chinese links and commodities in trade with Israel, I can tell you that over the years, we have an increase of Chinese investment in Israel. I can tell you, for example, our major dairy company, Nuva, a few years ago was bought by the Chinese, and they don't even like milk, but they still bought it. And we've had some other industries that have gone to China. Israel in the past had a lot of textile industries. Many of them went to China, many of our products. And even during this coronavirus issue, and this could not be by chance, I don't know if you heard, El Al, our national airline, recently won a major tender in now being like the only one, or one of the only ones in the world, or the first one, to have cargo flights from China to Europe. We're doing it. And that's very interesting. And I can tell you that's a major move that even after the coronavirus, El Al might even get a lot out of it, because we're going to be the dominant player now in cargo planes from China. So we have many, many products coming in. We even have Israelis who go there to do shopping and then come back and mail it here, especially building supplies. However, we also have another client, and their name is Washington, D.C. And at times they don't really like our surfing on AliExpress. They don't like it. So they express mail us a letter. Don't do it. So recently we started a new committee in Israel to, let's say, regulate foreign investment in the country, including the Chinese state, and to make sure not only investment doesn't impact very important industries of ours, but it doesn't impact our strong relations with America. Okay, even though they're teaching Chinese in schools here these days, we can learn Chinese in high school. Everyone speaks American.
Where, in China?
No, I'm talking about in Israel. In Israel.
In Israel, yes.
In Israel, we learn Chinese here and there, but everyone knows American.
Yeah.
So America is still more important than China. So that's why we're also looking into to have America less worry about Chinese investment in the country.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vera Vladimirovna, for your question. And we should outline that Professor Vishnyakova is one of the leading experts in Korean studies at our university. So this is why maybe she knows more about Korea, and it will be, I think, interesting discussion. So now I want to give the floor to our participants, to Daniel, please.
Thank you, Murat, for giving me the opportunity to ask a question. Thank you, Professor Freeman, for your lecture. There was a lot of new perspectives on the ongoing event that I hadn't heard before, and Professor Vishnyakova asked my original question, so I will change it. But I was really fascinated by your slides about China as a mediator. I am Iranian myself, and I can say without a doubt that in the Middle East, the thought of having either Russia or the United States as a mediator is usually not very supported by either one of the sides. And whatever question it might be in the Middle East, but specifically I'm asking about Israeli-Palestinian settlement. Do you think that China can be like a strong mediator, or China in the long run will be a guarantor of security in the region? And if like bringing more and more actors every day to the Middle East would be good for the benefit of the people in the Middle East in the long term? Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Danielle. I think that's a very good question. I think if we look at what has caused America to be such a good mediator between Israel and the Arabs, really historically, with Egypt and other countries, is really two major reasons. Both the friendship that we have with America and the checkbook America has. Because in the end, to make it all possible, even the peace agreement with Egypt, there were billions of dollars given both to us and Egypt. And by the way, many people don't know that up until the 2003 war in Iraq by the United States, the two countries receiving the most foreign aid by the US was Israel and Egypt. And now it's Iraq, Israel, and Egypt. We lost first place. Okay, but so the checkbook and the friendship, the heart and the pocket. That's what I always call it: the heart and the pocket. Now the Chinese, they have the pocket, no doubtably. They have the funds. They can do it. I can also tell you that one of the first countries to establish a diplomatic mission. Many people don't know that. Maybe I'm leaking it, but I'll tell you. One of the first countries to establish a diplomatic mission in the Palestinian Authority was China. They have a mission, a diplomatic mission. It's like an embassy. I think they even have one in Gaza until this day. So China has always had a foot in this area, has always looked to benefit as well, because in the end, part of the fear that the Chinese had with increasing relations with us, which by the way, Israel didn't recognize the communist regime in China until the US did. We didn't have relations with them either. We waited. And once that happened, the Chinese feared that if they get closer to Jerusalem, that might cause them to back away from 22 Arab countries and other Muslim countries like Iran and other countries because of their relations with Israel. But what we've seen over the years is that they can talk to us and talk to you during the same time. Look, we're on Zoom together. I guess that's a way of showing it. We're both Zooming to Beijing, Israelis and Iranians alike, no problem. And But I think that if we look at what's happening with regards to American power and American public opinion, which is saying we might not want to be the media of the world anymore, we want to be in our own world, might cause the Chinese, as I said before, to feel that this power that it's growing in Beijing could also cause it to grow in responsibility. And I think they might say to themselves, listen, even though we're not America, in the way we think about the world, we want to bring peace to the world. But the Chinese might say, listen, maybe peace is something good for our economy. Maybe peace is something good for our progress. So that might cause them to progress into the shoes of where America was historically. And I can tell you again, part of the reason why we're learning Chinese for the past decade in our high schools is because Israel, in the end, we're very pro-American, no problem. But just like any other country in the world, just like your country and just like Russia, the first country you're pro is your own. Russia is first of all pro-Russia. Israel, first of all, is pro-Israel. So in the end, we have to always be with an eye for any sort of developments in terms of what's happening in the world. And that might be one of them, where one day the mediator isn't John Kerry, it's John Chen.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, dear colleagues. We have also a question on our chat. Just a minute, please. One question from Irina. Irina, if you want, you can ask by your own, but I can add it if you want. Just tell me, please. Are you with us? Yes, Irina is with us.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for a very interesting and exciting lecture. I really enjoyed listening to you because all the questions are really topical nowadays. My question is with regard to the fact that basically the Asian countries are known to prefer working bilaterally rather than, adding some mediators into the process of negotiations. India probably is the best example because the only one case we can stress concerning India's involving some intermediary was in its war against Pakistan in 1965. So basically they prefer to work bilaterally. And you were talking about the possible role of Asian countries, namely China and India, as the mediator. So how would you comment on that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't think I mentioned India as a mediator, but the focus really was on China. I think we have to look again at what the interests are. I think that if we look at what you mentioned in terms of India-Pakistan relations, even India-China relations, recently they signed a treaty on an area of the border. It's a very bad border. The soldiers up there on the border, in the middle of the Himalayas, they can't see anything. And it can cause a lot of incidents. But we have to recall again, the events you mentioned occurred at a time where it was very clear who's managing the world. Who's managing the world? Whether or not it was during the Cold War, whether or not it was in a post-Cold War world where it was more apparent that the Americans are the ones, but because of the shifting powers, namely some would call a retreat, at least diplomatically, by the US in many parts of the world, maybe even affected by economic challenges, and at the same time, the growing power of countries that were much weaker back then. This is causing some countries, especially China, to realize that maybe a way to fulfill a greater potential economically and to bring more progress to my people, because that's in the end their interest, it could be taking on those mediator roles. Because in the end, as I mentioned, a mediator, it costs a lot. That's true, it costs a lot to be the mediator, but you might even gain a lot as well, gain a lot, both in terms of economic needs, in terms of military needs, different resources. So again, I think that on the one hand, for example, China is looking for economic roles, but I think as it's growing in power and America might be weakening in its sphere of influence, the Chinese might connect the dots and say, listen, we can even more bolster and strengthen our power if we take on the role of a mediator.
Yes, but indeed, in terms of China, I would say there are 2 points. First of all, China itself doesn't really need any mediators. If you take a look at its disputes in South China Sea, they well, permanently decline the requests of others, well, because it seems that they still prefer the bilateral format. And the second thing is that there are probably too many countries which try to balance China and to counter its influence in the world. So I'm not sure that there are too many countries which would invite China to mediate.
Okay, I agree with that in terms of the Chinese internal affairs. That's true, but my explanation is more about others, and I can tell you even America. America is mediated all the time, but if you want to mediate between America and someone else, they would never allow you to mediate. I don't even recall a mediation between America and someone else. They're the mediator. So I think with regards to China, you are correct. When it has to do with China, they don't want anyone calling in. But as again, when the original mediator like America is no longer answering the phone, no phone service, Beijing will be quick to answer.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Irina, for your question. It was really interesting. Then I want to read the question of our participants, Victoria. She would ask about how does the United States and China polarization influence United States-South Korea relations?
Well, looking at the relations between the U.S. and China in terms of what's happening on Korea, first off, we have to first look at relations between Korea and China. By the way, both South and North Korea, I would put them in the same camp with regards to this specific issue, and that is the issues of Japan and World War II. And there's a major history with regards to the activities of Japan during World War II, both in China and Korea. And the Chinese relationship, by the way, with North Korea is very much also based on the fact that even the Koreas sacrificed themselves for China during the war. And then the Chinese also sacrificed themselves during the Korean War. Now, with regards to the U.S. South Korea relationship, for one, the fact is there's over 20,000 American soldiers on the DMZ is something very much of a challenge to China. You can also add the bases that the U.S. has in the area in Japan. I think that if you look at the current relationship with regards to the Trump plan or his plans for Korea, and the fact he wants to maybe minimize the amount of soldiers in Korea. He's saying the Koreans aren't paying enough. You know, that's what he said. They're not paying enough. And it's costing us a fortune to hold the soldiers there. We might see this move to maybe improve the subject of Korea with regards to China by way of maybe of a weakening of relations between South Korea and the U.S. We should also mention that North Korea, Moon, the president of South Korea, for years has been trying to talk to North Korea in a more peaceful way. Let's help them, and that's something that not at all was always accepted by the U.S. in terms of what their policy was with regards to North Korea. So I think if we look at this triangle between the U.S., South Korea, and China. On the one hand, there's strong relations between the U.S. And South Korea. There's also strong relations between China and South Korea, pretty much because of trade. But on the other hand, there are certain issues by way of North Korea and the fact there are US soldiers there and at times also do military drills once a year with the South Korean army, which at times pose a challenge or somewhat nuisance to Chinese desires of impacting and influencing the area.
Thank you so much. Now we have a question from Alexei. Alexei, maybe you want to ask by your own because there are a lot of small questions. If you want, or I should read. Alexei?
Alexei here is with us, but...
Yes, okay, I will read it. Dear organizers, Professor Yonatan, thank you for your interesting and informative lecture. I have several questions below. Do you think that America has already lost the ability to prevent the rising Chinese diplomatic and economic power and its dominant force in East Asia? It's first question. Then he asked about why American policy of containment is ineffective, speaking about China. If so, whether coronavirus, whether coronavirus can change the situation or the spreading of Chinese influence would speed up. Do you suppose if America totally loses its role in East Asia, the Chinese invasion of Taiwan is really possible in future, or Taiwan may become a part of Chinese People's Republic without holding any military operations, but as a result of the economic and political domination of China in the region? What do you think about Chinese soft power and whether it's effective? It's like for another lecture, maybe questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Alexa. I'll try to shorten and try to put it all together. I think with regards to losing the ability to prevent the Chinese power, I think America is still in business. I think anyone who thinks that writing off America in terms of its power is mistaken. I think that it's not just about a change of position that America is having, but it's also because of the internal realities. And I think right now, America is still a major power. I think if you look at China, I think one major challenge or one major opportunity that America has with maybe seeking to face this Chinese power, I think it really looks internally. And I don't know if anyone here studies or studied China or anything like that. China, it's true that most of the Chinese are of the Han ethnic group, they're Han. But there's also minorities in China. I don't know if you know this. There's also minorities. And although the Han are the majority in terms of the people, large areas of China geographically are controlled by minorities. In other words, the majority doesn't control or doesn't live in most of China. It's a big country. And you can't rule out the fact that as China gets more and more powerful and people get richer and people have more progress, just like they are right now, that might cause certain elements in the country to desire more autonomy. I'm talking about the ethnic groups. And one could not rule out the fact that maybe one day, in terms of changes, we might see shifts in the way China is governed. Maybe one day China will turn out to be a federation. Who knows, in terms of the growing power of the ethnic groups. And that could maybe cause a short-term weakness maybe to the Chinese united power, which we see today in terms of the people and the country. Another thing really is events that we don't know about. This virus, you know, Corona was just a beer a couple of months ago. That was a beer you drank in Mexico. Who knew what a coronavirus was? There are certain events which could, like a wild card, cause both America to go up, China to go down, or the other way. And we don't know what they are. And as I mentioned also, the demographic impacts, a potential shift in terms of citizens returning, that could also impact. We have to recall that many of the Chinese who are successful in bringing in funds and doing all these things, they learned abroad. You know, they're coming from abroad and doing it. What happens if no longer Chinese are going to learn in New York? What happens? Okay, what happens if they're no longer in Silicon Valley? So I think that could also pose a big challenge to the economic might of China. We should also look at Russia, for example. If you recall, after the events in the Crimea and everything, there was a trend in the world to try to isolate Russia. Remember? And then they said, "Oh, the economy will go crazy. It will go down in Russia." And we're seeing now a renaissance of the local economy in Russia. All these industries where people said, "Oh, they're bankrupt." Now we're seeing Russia economy going up because of the fact they had to increase their investment inside their countries, and now we're having things going up in Russia that we didn't think about. So I think wild cards can also play here. So I can't rule out America being able to contain China or losing the fight. In regards to Taiwan, I think Taiwan, again, we can't know for sure what will happen with Taiwan. You might recall that Hong Kong, you know, in the end, there was an agreement and they joined China. After an agreement with Britain, there was an agreement with Portugal with regards to Macau. I'm not so certain that we can rule out the fact that the Taiwanese themselves, for some reason in the future, wish to join in some sort of a confederation of some sort with China, even though they're so different. But I can tell you that the events in Hong Kong are impacting public opinion in Taiwan. It's causing them to less want to go or less be inclined to reunite with China in the future. So I think part of what China is thinking is what I do in Hong Kong might impact what I do with Taiwan later in terms of how they feel. And with regards to Chinese soft power, that's a very good question. I think that if you look at China, they're more and more gaining soft power. Look, for example, their film industry. Look at these films that are winning Emmys and are all over Netflix. They're filming. That's a major impact on culture. Chinese culture is getting to the world. Their films, the language, their citizens are going abroad. So I think they're not doing it so much like America did, but I think they're getting to a point where they're able to project themselves, not with a soldier, but with a movie.
Thank you so much. So now it was last question from our participant, but I know that Professor Vishnyakova has some questions.
Yeah. Thank you
Please.
very much. I have one question about the COVID situation, which give very lots of advantages for president party in South Korea during the parliament election. Yes, they won there. And what do you think about the USA? What chances does Trump have in the election campaign now, connected with coronavirus?
Well, that's a very good question. I think I just saw a few days ago someone say he's going to lose, or some kind of a think tank. We've always got it right. He's going to lose. Donald's going to lose. Listen, I think looking at the American elections, they're just in a few months. Okay, it's a major election. I think that this situation right now is really in Trump's favor. The coronavirus, even though they're saying, oh, he's not wearing a mask when he goes to visit Ford, and he's saying all these things, I think the issue of the coronavirus on two fronts assists Trump, on two fronts. The first, and this has also been written about in scholarship, national emergencies cause people to rally around the flag, okay? If you recall George W. Bush, remember when he got elected? Almost most Americans, and he didn't get enough votes even. Approval rating, very low. 1 minute after September 11 in New York, 100% approval rating. Okay, it's something that historically is proven in America. Times of emergency, when there's a feeling that America is under attack and And when more and more people are saying the Chinese virus, they're not saying the virus, the Chinese virus is attacking, this causes a trend of rallying around the flag, and it helps the incumbent president. Okay, so it doesn't matter if it's Trump or Clinton was there, she would gain too. The next thing is really why the virus happened. And part of what Trump was saying all along, we need strong borders. We need strong borders. We need trade that's fair and doesn't take advantage of us. This virus issue is a good way for him to prove, and he'll be talking about it in his campaign. He's already talking about it. He's already talking about it. And it isn't a surprise that he visited yesterday the Ford factory. You probably saw on the news. He didn't go to see the new Ford Focus. He didn't go to see that. He went to see Ford producing medical equipment in their factories on American soil. So the coronavirus also is a narrative which is parallel to his narrative in 2016. And the narrative is, we need strong borders and we need a strong American-made economy. And what this virus has proven as that we need it stronger. And by the way, his made contender, Joe Biden, the former Vice President of Obama, in recent times is trying to say Trump is not tough enough on China. You're listening to what I'm saying right now. He's not saying the opposite. He's saying China, we need to be more tougher on China. So even he knows, Joe Biden, that the American public is really subscribing to that narrative, which again, right now, is more assisting Donald Trump in his wish to be reelected.
Okay, thank you. It's very interesting. Your point of view. Okay.
Thank you so much. Dr. Vishnyakova, you have some comments, or I can? No?
No.
Okay, so if our participants don't have any question, I think it's time to sum, because we talked about 2 hours.
2 hours, yes.
Yeah.
It was very interesting.
It was very interesting, and it was really so overwhelming, because really the topic is interesting and novel. So, but how to say? In the end, I just want to ask our, how to say, mainstream question. It's about the fate of globalization, because we as a School of International Regional Studies, we are interested in the fate of globalization. With Dr. Vishnyakova, we asked this question to our all participants, our key speakers. As I said, it was the 13th meeting within the framework of our project, Contemporary Area Studies. So, Dr. Yonatan, Dr. Freeman, what do you think? The fate of globalization. Our world will become more, how to say, regionalized. I mean, yes, we will move to some national protectionist policy, as you outlined now, that we should make American products, we should make Chinese products for Chinese, we should protect Chinese national interests for Chinese, Russian national interests for Russians, and etc. What do you think about globalization? It will change, or it will be the same after the coronavirus, I mean, after the pandemic?
Thank you very much. I think globalization, because I think a week or two ago, Donald Trump tweeted, by the way, I have a tip to all your students who don't have time, because they're studying all the time, to read the news. If you don't have time to read the news, go on Donald Trump's Twitter. 5 seconds, you know everything. I don't need CNN, no nothing. Twitter, 5 seconds. So a few days ago, Donald Trump wrote, I think, or he retweeted, I can't remember, globalization is dead. Oh, it's dead because of the coronavirus. Well, I think if you look at the technology, look at what we're doing right now, I think part of humanity is really to continue to get close to one another. I think that will continue no matter what hits us. And I think if we look at the coronavirus, yes, on the one hand, countries have disconnected from one another, but on the other hand, we found new ways to connect to one another without physically meeting one another. I could tell you here in Israel, where a lot of people, just probably in Russia as well, have been hit because of the coronavirus, we're having a new industry, a major new industry, where almost all the jobs you're seeing are remote. And there is no asterisk only for the coronavirus. It's remote forever, remote forever. And so I think globalization will exist, but we're going to see new and new forms of globalization. Whereas on the one hand, countries will make sure that in times of need, just like this, we'll have the tools we need in our own countries. But on the other hand, especially because of this, we're going to need new cooperation, so to prevent medical emergencies from spreading or from allowing people with that condition from getting to the countries. Just like after September 11th, you know, there was the 19 hijackers that changed everything. Now we have COVID-19, which might change everything.
Thank you so much. It was really a great pleasure to listen to you today. Thank you for our participants for their questions. It was so interesting, and we hope that our cooperation will continue. It's really a great pleasure and great honor for us to see you with us on our platform. As a School of International Regional Studies, we try to develop our relations.
Not only online, but offline too, yes.
Yes, and we hope that to see you maybe in future in Moscow to discuss some interesting points, interesting topics. So I think Professor Vishnyakova also support me in this invitation. Yeah. So, and I want to say that the topic is really interesting, but we hope that this COVID madness will end as soon as possible, because I'm personally so tired of this quarantine regime, of this lockdown in Moscow. I hope that in Israel the situation is better. We will also discuss the situation with one of your ex-deputy member of parliaments. Maybe you know her, Ksenia Svetlova. She's from Russia.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. If you want, we will be happy to see you in our discussion. Maybe if you are interested, of course. So now I think it's time to end our lecture, because it's really about 2 hours. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Professor Vishnyakova, to support this idea. Thank you, all participants, and see you soon at our next meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Freeman, for joining us today and for a very interesting lecture. Yes, I hope that we will meet.
Thank you very much. Always available.
Yes, you are welcome.